Okay. So a few key things that I want everyone to note. So office hours are kind of different. So, but I have them virtually on Zoom. So how that works, I always use the same link. You don't have to sign up ahead of time. I'm keeping like a sign up. I have like a Google Doc where in some other classes, like my freshman class, students have to do one-on-one meetings at the beginning, so they actually sign up for a spot. Some of those spots are during the office hours that are listed here. But basically, especially for this class, Mondays and Wednesdays, so after the virtual time, from noon to 1, it'll be a different link. That's one key thing. So like this is always the same link for Monday. Wednesday is always the same link if you want to come on and ask any 315 questions on Wednesday, but my office hours isn't the same link as this class. So it's always that same one for office hours. And so I will always just be on. And what I do, I just have Zoom on. I usually have my microphone off. If I'm not talking with anyone, I'll just have my camera off, but then I have the waiting room on. So like if you're like, hey, I have a question for office hours, it'll just ping you into the waiting room. And then so I'll just be like, hey, cool, like I'll open it up, then I can chat you too from the waiting room. If I'm meeting with another student, like today, I have a freshman who's meeting with me at 12:30, so it's during office hours. If one of you were to come on during office hours, you wanted to ask a question, I was already with another student, I would keep you in the waiting room and just say like, hey, we're almost wrapped up, just hang on for a few minutes. Or I might say like, hey, this will be a little while. Hey, are you free at 1 o'clock? And we should be wrapped up by then. So then it might just be a matter of scheduling or just saying like, hey, if you want to hang out for a while and then come back. So kind of like if you would come in person to like see me and be just like waiting outside of the office. So Mondays and Wednesdays, so right after our video meetings, I've got some time, and then again later in the afternoon, and then that's both of those 2 days. Tuesday, a little bit different schedule, but similar. Thursdays, just that noon time, and then Fridays, I've got a morning session and then an afternoon session. So just know like that link, I'll put that in our homepage too. I'll add that up to Canvas after today. So just so you know, because that is a different link than the ones we have for class. And then this class was a unique one. It was supposed to be having one day in person, potentially. It was supposed to have Mondays, but just given the fact that we couldn't even be on campus anyways, and also the roof was being redone in Warner building, so that's still not completely finished yet. And then the Rec IM was one of the other places where we were going to be having a lot of our class sessions. The renovation at the rec still isn't quite complete. I think they actually supposed to get possession of the building today. So that was one of the reasons that I just decided that's not going to work just to plan for it, because I don't know how long that's going to be. And I don't know with COVID if they're even going to have people come on campus anyways, unless eventually. So I'm keeping it where we do have that synchronous time, but it'll always be recorded. It'll always be the same link every single Monday. And then on Wednesdays, that's basically where it's review. So like this week, the new topics that we have are the full NSCA statement on long-term athlete development, the fitness instructional kind of like structure for PE from Shape America is the other new document. And then it's the first, like not first two, but 2 chapters in the book. So on Wednesdays, what I plan to do is just kind of like a review. So Wednesdays, there'll be a PowerPoint, like really quick, saying like, hey, here's the key things I want you to focus on in like chapter 7 is one of the chapters. So as you go through, like, here's a key concept that might be a little tricky, or here's a key concept that like chapter 7 is related to sex and age differences in kids or in movers. And here's a concept that's contrary to like what a lot of people believe about training youth, or like common myth that we have is like kids shouldn't lift weights, right? People think it'll stop their growth. This chapter talks about that. So there'll be a couple key review points for each of the assigned elements that are coming through that week on the schedule. And then it'll also be a chance if you want to come, it's kind of like open, it's like open class office hours. So it's like, if you have a specific question on like, hey, I'm looking at this assignment, but I don't really quite understand it, then it's open time just to ask those questions. And then those questions will also be on the recording too. So that's what Wednesdays is. Wednesday is optional. I expect like my thought, I was like, probably no one will come on just because everyone's used to like doing their thing and it wasn't scheduled, but it's just another way to have a little bit of review to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So the idea is just to have it recorded, kind of like a recorded lecture that anyone can listen to later. So that's Wednesday. Wednesday has its own Zoom link too. It's always going to be the same one though, every single Wednesday. So that's just, if that's a time where you're like, hey, I don't know what to do for this, or like question on this quiz question. And that even could be, and honestly, that's fair game. If you are taking a quiz and you want to take it during that class time, so like Wednesday, like taking it together and you're like, hey, I'm taking the quiz right now. I'm not going to give you answers, but if you're like, what does this even mean? That could be an option. So like if it were me, I would do the reading. I would probably open up the quiz Wednesday before class, keep it open, and just be like, hey, this is a question I wasn't sure on. So that could be an option for you too. All right. Rest of the stuff is just general things you can look through. It just talks about how it meets the shape initial teacher standards, talks about majors and minors. So required course readings. And so this week is the first week that anything from the textbook is going to be assigned. So this is what the textbook looks like. It's massive, it's really thick, it's blue. Couple things on why we have this textbook and why this particular one versus like, there's some other ones that are more PE specific, like the fitnessgram administration model. There's a PDF version of that. So when we get to the fitness testing unit, then I'll just post that PDF so you don't have to buy it. Why you have to do, or why I chose this book, it's for a couple reasons. A big reason is because when you take your PE certification MTT exam, so that's your test to become a teacher, you usually take that while you're student teaching or right before you student teach. Some people take it after they student teach. There's a significant amount of questions that relate to all of the concepts from anatomy and phys, exercise physiology, biomechanics, motor development, and motor learning. And for pretty much everybody, you take those classes earlier on, like freshman, sophomore year, and then like 4+ years later, you have to remember some pretty detailed concepts on that exam. And I've served on committees with the state, with the MTTC, where we create the exam and we have to review questions. And just knowing what some of those questions are from some of those content areas, they're not general ones. They're not like minute detail specific, but you need to know and still have major concepts still in your recollection. And then the other reason why we have it is part of our standards and expectations for kids is that when we're teaching, we're able to relay concepts of physiology, of biomechanics in our lessons. And so we have to figure out, how do we teach this kind of unique concept of, say it's the Krebs cycle or something like that from X-Phys, like how do we adapt that and teach that in a 5th grade PE lesson? So we're not wanting to lecture the kids about Krebs cycle. So maybe we make up a game that relates to how energy is processed in the body or at the cellular level. So the big thing is with this, the beginning, let's see, is it 8, I think 8 chapters, all of the ones that are towards the front of the book, which you have one of them for this week, all the way up through chapter 8, basically 1 through 8. Each chapter covers a subdiscipline in exercise science, basically in kinesiology, where there are going to be potential test questions. 9 through 11 are all nutrition. There's a couple chapters, 2 chapters on assessment. So we'll read those during when we go over fitness assessment. And then a big chunk of the remaining chapters are very practical. There's exercises, there's movements, there's pictures in there. And so that's going to be when we're going through a lot of the applied stuff. So one big thing to know, we don't go through the book in order. Keep that in mind. So it's not chapters 1 and 2 this week, it's chapters 7 and 21. But part of the reason why I have you do that is so that you get a review that's much closer to the time frame when you're going to be taking that MTT exam, and some tips for that. So like this book, it's not the cheapest book out there. So whatever way you want to acquire it, buying it, renting it, well, I would say normally share it, but like don't share stuff because of COVID. Ebook version, whatever you need. If you're thinking you're not going to be keeping this book, what I recommend is when you're reading through the chapters for this class, to go through the quizzes, take notes, like almost like outlining as you go through the chapters, because then later when you're getting ready or you're actually actively studying for the MTTC, there's an MTT study guide out there that most students will buy but it's basically like practice questions. It's not going to go in depth into the information that's here. So as you take notes through, especially those first 8 chapters that are all of those review things from the past classes, I would say have those notes ready if you're feeling like you're not going to want to go back to the book or buy the book again or get it again. So that's one of the key reasons why we use that book, is just to help review and keep information going towards the MTTC. Second reason is, like I mentioned, there's assignments in this class because there's youth PE standards related to incorporating concepts into those lessons. So then you have all of the content, all of the science you have right here in one spot. So you don't have to use the internet to like, okay, what's the Krebs cycle? It's all right there. And you can just open up and go to it. That's the second reason. The third reason is one of the things I think during Thanksgiving week, this is the topic, so it's a little lighter. But one of the key things that I want to make sure that as teachers that, and I know a lot of PE teachers are coaches, a lot of them have interest in fitness or in strength and conditioning too. By going through this book essentially is the prep book for the NSCA Strength and Conditioning Coach certification. There's other study materials they have that, but one of the things that we emphasize, I know you two here, you're Canadian, so things are a little bit different in Canada, but still same thing conceptually, is I always recommend if you're a PE teacher, get some additional certifications, partly because you will have summertime. And depending on how the high school structure, if you are a teacher at a high school, even if you're not at a high school, even if you're at a middle school, more high schools are hiring professionals who are actual strength and conditioning coaches. So the ones that are usually a bigger school or have a higher athletic priority, they're either hiring someone separate from the community who has that certification and just bringing them on as a subcontractor, or they're putting them in a paraprofessional position. An advantage that a PE teacher would have is if you like the idea of coaching something after school, like teaching your classes, or if you like the idea of incorporating strength and conditioning into the actual PE schedule, so that athletes and non-athletes would have elective options to take their conditioning or strength and conditioning during the day, because you would not only have the PE certification, but also the strength and conditioning certification. It gives you another option to be able to incorporate that into your curriculum, and then also to just make additional money. So think of like a strength and conditioning coach PE teacher that you get salary for teaching PE for the teacher's salary. Just like if you were to then coach a sport after school, you get supplemental pay, you get a stipend for, being a soccer coach. Same thing with strength and conditioning. You would get supplemental pay for having that role. And there's potential, even if you're not teaching at the high school position, to still, like, say elementary is a little tougher in the US with how the times of days work, but still is possible. But especially middle or junior high school, to have those teaching hours, and then to also transition if you wanted to. And I know not everyone is interested in strength and conditioning. Maybe you're really big on sport and you're wanting to coach a sport after school, but it provides another revenue opportunity. And then it provides another opportunity. One of the realities of teaching right now is teaching is a profession that isn't the easiest in the current political climate. It's not like where we see teachers who are staying for like 45 years in their teaching position. And so it gives you a bit of knowledge, especially if you get that strength and conditioning certification. Gets you some knowledge if you're saying, you know what, hey, I really like this. Maybe I want to transition into more of that type of space. It gives you an option, gives you more than just that teaching certification. And so those are kind of my 3 really big reasons. Main one is just keep you going in that content so that you're not just totally blindsided or having to like figure out, where do I get this information when I'm studying for MTCC? Second is, these are concepts we have to teach our kids. Third, it gives you some additional income possibility. And also the other thing is in the summers. So as teachers, if most districts, at least around here, this part of the country, I'm not sure about Canada, but we have our traditional school year still. So we're still like a September through June kind of model. And so you have months off. And so a lot of teachers are like, okay, well, what do I do in the summer? Like maybe get a part-time job, get something else to supplement. strength and conditioning is in the same field, same profession as physical education. So that creates some opportunities. If you want to go into that role as strength coach with a CSCS, you can also do personal training. So it gives you space to continue to work. Or say you want to get hired on in the summer by your school to do all of the summer strength and conditioning with your athletes. It still gives you that opportunity if you want to take it. So that's a big reason why we have that book. And it's definitely something that I recommend. If you're in PE already, if you're already in sport, looking at this content, looking at fitness, looking at how to teach it, having another way to monetize and develop revenue for yourself and help support yourself is a really good option. So that's my spiel on the book. So is required. Couple things though on the reading. So almost every week, starting this week, you get 2 chapters that you'll have to go through. There's a couple, I think 1 week later on at the end, towards the end, where there are 3 that are in the 1 week. Each week for the 2 chapters that you have, there's 25 weekly points that are associated with the reading. So there's always going to be a quiz that has content from both of the chapters on it. So that'll be between 15 to 20 points. It'll be a little bit varied each week. That'll be just like multiple choice questions. So multiple choice, a couple true false, but usually multiple choice related to the readings from that book. And then there also will be a discussion question from that chapter. So always 2 each week, one from one chapter, one from the other. That's basically like a problem. It poses a problem, and then you have to use what you use from the chapter, what you learned from the chapter to help solve it. So it's always application based, something related to sport, something related to training. Some of them will be PE specific too. So not all of them will be PE, but it's always related to the content in that chapter. And those are things where there's not necessarily only one right answer, kind of like a quiz. So that's why that'll be discussion format. And then the third thing associated, so part of those, that lump sum of 25 points each week, there's going to be some sort of applied element. So it might be share a movement and how you would adapt it. So scale it up or scale it down if it's one of the chapters where it was applied. Some of these beginning chapters where it's on biomechanics of movement, for example, it'll be pick a concept and all the whole long list of all of the vocabulary, all of the concepts, like the main kind of words. Pick a concept and then create a short game, create a skit, create a character that you would use like in elementary that helps showcase and helps teach kids what this concept is. So if it's a stretch shortening cycle is one of the vocabulary concepts that you have, all right, how do I create a game that's going to be more geared towards younger kids, middle school, elementary, that's still appropriate for them to learn and to understand, but I can put it into a game, or it could be an example of how I'm going to teach this concept to kids. So there's always going to be something short that's also applied each week. So always 25 points associated with the chapters, and the chapters will have their own module always. So it'll just be one massive module, NSCA, Essentials of Strength and Conditioning. And this week up on Canvas, after I load up this lecture, it'll be chapter 7 and 21, because that's from this week. So then in that you'll have the quiz that's from it, and then you'll have the applied discussion question, and then the application element that's a part of it. So just know the chapter stuff is always going to be its own section. Another thing with the chapters, so I was thinking about this because I know some people have longer or more stressful weeks than others. The chapters are easy things that if people wanted to work ahead on, that you could work ahead on. So what I decided after a little bit of thinking about it and just some feedback is with the chapters, you'll have due dates, but if you want to work ahead, I'm going to try and this week put all of the chapters that are assigned in September, post all of those chapter quizzes up. So if you want to work ahead and just get the chapter stuff out of the way, you can do that. Same thing, I'll put all of the October chapters up. So if you want to work ahead, because those are kind of things, if you're just in a groove, you're just like reading, taking notes, doing the quiz, doing the application, you can hammer out those, I don't want to say quickly, but like in that type of space, it's going to be different than the other parts of the assignments where it's like, watch this lecture, listen to this podcast, do this discussion, like go through this like new element. So that's one of the things I think I'm going to do is just go through all this September. So I think September we have 7 and 21 today, and then next week it's 1 and 2, and then the next week 3 and 4. And with those due dates, I'm going to keep those due dates flexible. So I'll put all of the September chapters, I'm going to put that due date at the end of September. So like if you haven't gotten the book yet, it gives you some time to still like go through and make sure you get that. So that's the kind of unique element that this class has, is we're going to stay pretty true to that book, but just keep checking the due dates so that you don't we're definitely not going through it start to front or start to back. So questions so far about the textbook? Anything on that? Good. Okay. Next, so Canvas obviously is where everything is going to be. I'm on Canvas like 8 hours a day, like, well, not at 9 a.m., but like basically from every day from like 11 to like 4:30 or 5, I'm doing something either like this or posting stuff. So I'm always on Canvas. So because we're online and because that's the format, any questions that you have related to class, honestly, even if they're not related to class, send me a Canvas message, because since I'm on it anyways with something, I'm going to see those pop up right away in the messages versus emails. I have my email checking time each day is going to be at the end of the day after office hours. So basically like 4 to 5 p.m. is when I go through emails, just getting everything answered, making my to-do list for the next day. So if you want something like quick question or like, hey, I don't understand this discussion or whatever, send me a Canvas message. That'll be the easiest way to do that. There's no live text assignments for this particular class. Grading scales on there. All the points are on here. So all of the modules that are unique concepts, they will have their own module, and you'll see what the points are attached to it. And so when we get to the schedule, there's going to be some sort of unique module with each week that we have of the semester. The textbooks assignments, so this is where it says there's 25 points each week, and then we have 10 weeks of textbook types of work. So it's always going to be a quiz. There's always a scenario, that's the problem, like applied problem, and then some sort of application assignment that goes with it. We have 9 movement profile assignments. So this is basically where each person in the class will get assigned one of the movements that are a movement of the week. And those are things that you'll have videos that we'll go through. And then on our Monday classes, once we get into movements, there'll be some Mondays where the lecture is going to just be like me going over some of the basic stages of those movements. So like say this week, like Simone, like say you were assigned to like kettlebell swing, you would have to identify what are the phases of the movement. So there's 3 phases: preparatory phase, the actual phase, and then like the recovery phase. So what are the phases? What are the critical elements with performing or each phase? Like, okay, how do you set up? So it's your feet in a certain position, 2 hands on the kettlebell, core engaged, that's preparatory. And then what do you do to initiate movement? So going through critical elements, common errors, cues, all those things you've seen before. And then scaling or modifications is going to be a part of it. So how do you make it easier? How do you make it harder? And then it'll involve a physical demonstration of it. So that'll mean like you have to do a video of at least 3 of the different modifications that you come up with, and what kind of feedback would you likely give to the common errors that you might see. And then are there any good resources? So that could be like, all right, where's a really good video online that showcases how to do a kettlebell swing or showcases a different variation. So each movement profile will be worth 10 points, and there'll be 9 assigned, or 9 assigned to each person throughout the semester. So those come in a couple weeks, not quite yet at the beginning. And then there are 5 workout design assignments, each worth 10 points. And these are going to be in relation to, they're going to connect with the reading. So when we go through the chapters that relate to warm up and mobility, flexibility, the workout design is going to be designing a warm up related to a specific scenario. So if like, say your scenario was you're playing soccer, for example, in your PE class with kids, right? Well, what does soccer demand? Like, how do you prepare for playing soccer? There's going to be some cardiorespiratory activity. There's going to be change of direction. There's going to be having a lot to do with your feet and agility in that type of position. So we want to make sure the movement prep and the warm up is at least going to involve those 3 things. And so we're going into how do we use what we learned from the chapter and from the lecture into how to making a warm up. So that's going to be that workout for that week. So other weeks when we're talking about aerobic fitness, the workout design is going to be an aerobic or cardio style of workout, whether it's stations, whether it's high intensity intervals. It's going to be coming up with a workout. And then the final, and this is something that I'm going to start to introduce as early as I can. It'll probably be around the midterm time. So we're going to go over from a curriculum standpoint, what does fitness actually look like in PE? Because there's different ways that teachers or schools and levels, elementary, middle, or high school, will incorporate fitness. Sometimes it's a whole class, which is all personal fitness. Sometimes it's going to be every single day there's some sort of fitness training. Sometimes kind of a more older model that we want to get away from is like fitness is a unit, a true 2-week unit. And so we still see that happen some places. And so like, I want to make sure at least you know what to do with that, is say if you're student teaching and you have to do a unit that's short and condensed in only 2 weeks. So you'll be given 2 different types of curricular scenarios, and then you're going to have to design what you're going to do for that. So if it's the unit, it's going to be unit plan. If you get high school and it's a whole fitness focused course, you're going to be thinking about, well, what do I actually want to teach in this course? If it's for freshmen, if it's for seniors, if it's an elective class, what does that mean? So that's going to be something we'll go through starting at the midterm time, working up to at the end. So it's a little different than the traditional unit plan, block plan, lesson plan, even though that will still be a part of it. But we're looking more at like big picture. How do you make a class that's focused on fitness? All right, so course pacing. So this basically, all of these take you through like the basic topics that we have for the week. It'll be, here's the chapters that are going to be assigned for that week. So if you want to try and pace, if you're like, no, I'll just stick with like 2 chapters per week, can't handle working ahead, that's where your pacing should be. But like I said, I'm going to post, that's my plan, I'm going to post from the whole month. I'll just post the quizzes and those discussions. So if you want to work ahead, you can do that if you know it's going to be busy or something at a certain time. And then each week, it's what you're going to be able to expect. So like this week, for example, you're going to have the NSCA textbook quiz, concept application, and discussion board. That's 25 points. And then we have one of the modules will be a new one that will go up after this, is fitness concepts review. So that's going over what are our health related fitness components, what are the skill related components, making sure that all of that terminology, that everyone has those set so that there's no question of what those are. And then the new thing that no one has seen before is a document from Shape America. It's called the Instructional Framework for Fitness Education in PE. And it takes basically what our grade level content outcomes do, so our GLOs. They're pretty general for standard number 3, which is the fitness and physical activity focused standard. It goes into great detail about exactly what to teach beyond what the grade level outcomes do. So when we think about, well, what are we going to teach our elementary kids? What are we going to teach in middle school? What would we teach in a high school personal fitness class? Every single concept we would need to teach is in that document, because Shape tells us what we need to do. So this week is the introduction to that document. So it's a PDF. It'll be in the fitness framework module. You'll download it. You'll have to go through the different sections and basically do a summary, kind of like a master content list of what we're actually teaching in fitness, or what we're supposed to be teaching in fitness. So each week, so like this week, you'll have your textbook stuff, and then there's going to be 2 other modules. So it gives you at least what to expect that's coming out this week. And everything will always come out on Monday in the afternoon. So I always want to go through the lecture, go through what to expect for this week. And then once the lecture downloads and I upload it, then we'll have the new information will be up for that week. And depending on how in depth the module is, ones that are pretty easy, that are a little bit shorter, that are more cut and dry, you'll have always, the due dates will be on the following Sunday night. If it is something a little bit more in depth, a little bit longer, or it's nothing here is really like a project other than at the end, I may give you more time for it. I may give you 2 weeks to complete it, but just know the new one will always kind of open the next week, or the new segment will open the next week. So good. Okay, so far, any questions so far? Okay, and then you can see the topics too that we're going through on each side. So fitness foundations for PE, that's really that instructional framework. Next week, there's going to actually be, I probably won't be in my house. I'm going to go won't be able to go to campus to do it at the rec, but I'll go to a gym and do it. So going actually movement. So there'll be movement as a part of next week's body weight basics, kind of expands on functional. There's movement in that one. Then we go through mobility, flexibility, kind of the warm-up prep. 2 weeks for resistance training, where that's our focus, plyo, speed, agility. A week for aerobic, and then 2 weeks for fitness or fitness assessment in November, leading up into Thanksgiving. And so Thanksgiving week, I probably won't, well, I guess that Monday we could still do this. I'll still record something on Monday, but Thanksgiving week is going to be a little bit of a lighter week, only 30 points. There's no book or chapter readings that week. And it's basically going through a model of like, what are their supporting careers? Kind of think of it like side hustles for teachers. What else is out there? What are other options where you're already doing the same type of content, already looking at the same kind of content? And then that week there'll be a lot more in depth about that final. So I'll have some office hours that week. Then we go into nutrition. This is the 1 week where there's 3 chapters. That's something, just heads up on that. So there's 30 points associated with the NSCA book, and it's all related to nutrition, basics of nutrition, performance enhancing nutrition, and then also supplements and essentially like performance enhancing drugs. Has its own chapter too. So there are 3 chapters in the nutrition element. And I thought like I could just do 2. I wouldn't have to do the performance enhancing one necessarily, but there are grade level outcomes in fitness expectations relating to teaching, especially high schoolers, about PEDs. And there absolutely is PED use at the high school level. We see it. So it's one of those things like we should be prepared to teach it, even though it's not as prevalent as like college or professional. And that we're also going through body composition is going to be when we're going to be hitting on that concept. And then our final week of class, there's going to be no new topics, but it's going through all of the details and just whatever is needed for that final. So it doesn't mean it's not assigned that week. It'll be assigned around midterm. Some time will be devoted to it that Thanksgiving week, but just nothing new during that last week of school. And then the finals week is going to be that 14th through 18th week. And for that, I haven't picked a due date yet for the long-term, long and short-term, which is unit and lesson planning, but it'll be due that week. So that's kind of what we've got. There's always some sort of chapter almost every single week, except for one of the fitness weeks, and then Thanksgiving week. And then at the end, there's nothing new. And then all of the like course policies, that kind of stuff. A couple things I just wanted to share because we are using discussion board. And when it comes to fitness, when it comes to inclusivity, when it comes to ability, even a few things related to like biology and genetics, there's definitely some differences of opinion that will come out, especially in the discussions related to some of the topics. And so a couple things I want to make sure that people keep in mind is use of inclusive and culturally responsible language when we're describing populations, especially if they're other than our own. And making sure that when we're responding to someone else, whether it's in the class, like live here in the breakout group or online, making sure we ask clarification questions to understand someone's point of view versus saying like, hey, you're totally wrong. Asking a question first, like, hey, can you explain this? Or can you explain this scenario? Applying empathy, and then trying to avoid absolutes. And that's something too that in fitness and in science, a lot of times we hear a lot of absolutes, like, oh, kids should never strength train, or kids shouldn't lift weights until they're 13 years old. Well, like we'll find out that's kind of a variable thing and depends on a lot of situations in that. So that's a key thing I wanted to go through. I think that's it for the syllabus. So that was the big, kind of the big major thing I wanted to run through. And then the last thing that I want to go through, I'm going to stop sharing. So we'll go back to our actual screen, is you can turn your microphones on. The one topic that I want to bring out that is going to come through with one of our discussion questions this week on age and sex related differences to fitness and physical activity and training is what myths, or maybe you don't know if they're myths, but what are some myths that you have heard that you think are no longer myths, that they're now debunked, that science has helped shown that they're not true anymore, related to especially either different sexes training and capacity physically, or ages? What's something that maybe is like was old practice, or you've heard an older generation say that like, oh, this is a sex related different, girls do this, boys do this, or girls develop this, boys don't, or kind of the absolute like kids shouldn't do this, or you should wait until a certain age to start something that you've heard so far.
I don't know if this like totally relates, but like when you're warming up for like a sport, for example soccer, I know that like FIFA came out with this like, I don't know, it's like a warm up that everyone should do, and then I think like people like were saying that that's not like proper. I don't know exactly, but it was something to do with that, and that like static stretching versus like moving is like one's better than the other, and I just don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like something along the lines of that.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's definitely one that's out there in a lot of places, and maybe not necessarily like age or sex related, but like for sure, like we're seeing like major governing bodies, like places that people trust for our rules and certifications and officials and competitions that are leaders in the sport, right? And then like we do this in PE, which isn't the same as the sport, or even if it's in the sport, you're like, well, actually, like it's not the worst thing to do. Their intention is probably good from FIFA, like to make sure people are warming up, but then is like, is that the latest thing, or is that what like the highest performers are doing, or is that just meant to be like this very blanket generalized like, hey people, make sure you warm up? But yeah, the whole static versus dynamic stretching, that will come out in our warm up mobility unit, because that's something that we still hear today. And like I can speak to that. So like in middle school track and field and cross country, when I coach, so like all of the coaches like that are on my coaching staff, like we're all on the same page. It's track, so we're track, especially it's power, it's speed. Like you need to prepare to like go from sitting in a desk all day in middle school to like doing workouts, like where you're doing intervals and stuff like that, even cross country. And so like we do minimal to no static stretching at the beginning of practice. Everything is gradually working on dynamic movement, especially through the hips, especially through like the lower limb joints, core activation, glute activation, and then eventually we work on acceleration and just form and technique drills. And so I remember especially the first season, when it was like new coaches and the parents weren't used to it, and the kids like in PE, their PE teachers do static stretching at the beginning of class. All of their a lot of kids play club soccer in my district that I teach in or coach in. And so they're like, well, in soccer, this is the warm up that we do. Like we sit and we do this hamstring stretch. And it took us a while to try and explain, like, it's not that we're not doing it. The parents are like, how come you're not warming up? We're like, we're doing like this incredible warm up. And like, it's to prepare us so that they can do this workout where they're running repeat 200s. And so that was one of the things it took some time to explain and get the parents and the kids, they bought in quicker than the parents. But to be like, just because that's what a warm up has been in every single club soccer, every single after school sport that you've done and in PE, doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. And we try and avoid saying like, that's wrong and this is right. And we always made sure we put time at the end for static stretching. We're like, think about this. Your muscles are super warm. They've been going all practice. You've been doing these runs. We have the most amount of blood flow now. Now is the great time to actually stretch them, to work to increase that range of motion and like long-term increase it, versus the beginning of practice. It's kind of like short-term increasing. It's priming the muscles, the joints, and the tissues for more movement. So that still is something like every season. It's like, parents are like, how come you're not stretching? We're like, well, we are. We're doing like all this dynamic mobility. We're doing activation. We're stretching at the end. And like, it's an old way of thinking. And the stretching information that's still out there, like in just general, like, oh, how to exercise. If you Google it, it's like, all right, do this, the old school hamstring stretch, do like the behind the head tricep stretch, do this stretch. It's like, there's a lot more that exists out there than just those. But yeah, that's a really good one. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's going to be a major thing that is kind of a key element of the entire warm-up unit that we have, is this idea of like, is one better or worse than the other? It's just, it's always, the answer is always, well, it depends on what you're trying to do. It depends on the situation. So anything else that's maybe a myth, or what was considered the right way to do things, and now it's like, well, I don't know if it's really best practice.
I think like one thing I always heard when I was younger is like women shouldn't, like females shouldn't lift heavy weights to make you look too bulky or
Yeah, I was gonna ask why do you think people said that? That's definitely a reason you'll get too bulky. Not saying it's a good reason, but anything else that you've heard other than that aesthetic reason that women shouldn't lift heavy weights?
I don't know, like other than aesthetic.
Which that in itself is really telling, the fact that there's no attempt to have a scientific reason behind it other than like we want women to look a certain way, right? And just it kind of goes the flip side for males, right? So like males or masculine bodies are like, all right, you need to lift weights, you need to get big, you need to look strong, like you need to have this like masculine kind of look. It definitely goes the flip side. That expectation from an aesthetic point of view goes for men. So like that not impossible standard, but that warped aesthetic standard, it applies to both genders. At some point, and this goes a lot more for aerobic fitness, but there definitely was information that was out there like 100 years ago, basically, that was saying like, well, women can't, because they're not as strong as males, or like, yeah, there are some physiological things that are different with men and women with our anatomy and a little bit related to our physiology. So it was like, well, because women aren't quite as strong when it comes to like an absolute standpoint, that they shouldn't work on their own relative strength. So it's like, okay, if this woman isn't going to be as strong as like, you know, example A woman, example B male, then the woman shouldn't work on developing her own relative strength. So that was something we're seeing, that like, well, they're just not so strong. And I think there's things that go into, again, both genders that relate to just cultural norms. So like, all right, men should be able to lift a lot of things. Men were the ones that did all the manual labor in different types of industries and economies. And so it was the idea that men should be able to lift this. And if you think of old school chivalry, it was like, well, men should carry the groceries in for the woman, or like like that still happens. Like sometimes like a dude will be like, hey, like your arms are full of 2 grocery bags, like do you need me to carry one? It's like, well, that's nice, thanks for asking, but like I'm okay. But it comes from this very old kind of point of view where it's like women weren't capable of that, and so you needed the other sex to do it. So we definitely see that in aerobic fitness, though. That's one of the spaces where that comes through for sure. So the first woman, Catherine Schweitzer, to run the Boston Marathon, that was the normal science, was that women's hearts just couldn't handle 26.2 miles, that they couldn't handle that volume of movement. And they thought they had science to show it. It was not actual science, but that was one of the main reasons, other than sexism. What they were saying is like, well, women just can't handle that level of training or that level of capacity. So there's a lot of gender related things we see. Anything related to age? So anything that like you remember hearing that like when you're a kid that you shouldn't do, or that you should wait for when you're a teenager, or anything that you hear from coaches or from parents, other places? How about lifting weights? Did you ever hear like you would need to wait to a certain age to lift weights?
I was never told that, but we never like lifted weights when I was younger. It wasn't a thing until high school.
Yeah, high school, right? Is that the same for you, Simone?
It was like a personal thing.
Yeah, mine was in high school.
So that's that whole thing. It comes from like, obviously you need to manage and keep things safe, obviously for kids, and manage what they're doing. But that ultimately comes from the concept, that myth that was there, is that, well, if you lift weights when you're young, it'll stunt your growth. And so that's really been the main reason until recently that people are using to limit why we're not doing, and I'm not saying like pumping iron hardcore, like hardcore resistance training, just like strength training period hasn't been used extensively with kids. And the focus with kids and fitness has predominantly been aerobic. So running things to get the heart rate up, which again is good, but we need to think about what else is there. And in the long-term athlete development reading for this upcoming week, or the module that's up now, there's a lot of repeated, like multiple pillars, or those are all these main points. Multiples of them will say like kids need to have motor skills ready. They need to have strength, and I need that general fitness. So it's not just like cardio only when you're a little kid, and then high school, you can introduce strength training. You need all of those so that you're developing in an appropriate way in all of those 3 areas. And then basically it says your development will be blunted. That means just like muted or slowed or delayed if you're not working in all of those major areas. And so that's one of the things in PE, we really want to make sure that we normalize, is even for our elementary or your younger kids, is things that involve some sort of body weight training, and even when it's appropriate, when they're ready, resistance at appropriate levels can be okay for them. So it's more than just cardiorespiratory only, and that we're still incorporating motor skills along the way. So, all right, so that will be one of your discussions that you'll have this week is related to that. So that's all I have for today. So this was mostly just a little check-in, going through some of the key things related to the textbook. Today, I'm going to post, so the 3 weeks of September that have chapters. So it's 7, 21, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll put all of those segments up there. So it'll be 75 points worth of textbook, and feel free to work ahead. If you need a week where you need to like not do it because other stuff is more pressing in other classes, just know there will always be kind of an end of the month due date to get all of the September readings and September chapters. So everything else will be week by week depending on how big the module is. So, all right, any questions for now? Okay. I think that's it. I'm gonna stop recording because I have a soccer